Hello there, welcome back to the channel, and the results are in for the villain vote that's been going on my channel for the last few weeks. Who is the greatest villain in Star Trek? Obviously, there's a few people not mentioned on these lists, so feel free to mention in the comment section down below who do you think should have been on the list, or maybe if you disagree with the winner. We got up to the semi-finals on the actual votes, so on this video we're going to be doing the finalists, and in the comment section down below there will be a pinned comment which you can actually vote, if you feel inclined to, on the actual overall winner. And I'll give that a few days and see who actually comes out as the number one. But in the meantime, like, share, and subscribe, and let's get straight into this. Okay, so I have to have some notes because there's a lot of these, but the first group was Damon Bach, who obviously was the Ferengi Damon who had a bit of a vendetta against Picard for killing his son. Nero, the time-traveling Romulan that created a divergent timeline. Shinzon, the clone of Captain Jean-Luc Picard that was raised by the Reman and overthrew the Romulan government, and Sela, the daughter of Tasha Yar, half Romulan, half human antagonist. Sela was the winner of the first group of votes. The second group had Lore, the evil brother of Data, the older and malfunctioning android. General Chang, the conspirator with Federation military personnel that didn't want to see an end to the hostilities between the Federation and the Klingon Empire, and would assist in the assassination of Chancellor Gorkon and later attempted assassination of the Federation president as well. And of course we had Kai Wynn, who, I should say, Louise Fletcher made the greatest villain of all time in a lot of ways. I don't just mean in Star Trek, just she was so good at making you hate that character. It's like there's a bit of a dichotomy, I would say, between her and Dukat, just to point this out, where Louise Fletcher's Kai Wynn was a character who you kind of loved to hate. The moment she was on the screen, you just wanted someone to throw her out of an airlock. That is a great testimony to the actress portraying that character. Absolutely fantastic. Whereas Mark Alamo's Dukat, you wanted to love him, but you couldn't help but hate him. He was like the opposite. He always seemed to be on the cusp of almost being the good guy. You were rooting for him to do the right thing, and ultimately he'd disappoint you. They were like two sides of the same coin, and when they brought them both together in season 7, it made one of the best villain pairings I think I've ever seen. The next in this line was Tomalok, a Romulan antagonist played by the late Andreas Katsoulis, who's more famous for playing Jakar on Babylon 5, played an absolutely scene-chewing Romulan villain and antagonist in a few episodes of The Next Generation. The winner of this list was General Chang. Group 3, we had Silic, one of the heads, if not the head, of the Suliban Cabal in the 22nd century, working for Future Guy and basically running one of the factions in the Temporal Cold War. We had Gul Madred, very famous Cardassian Gull, who would interrogate Picard, responsible for creating the incredibly well-used meme of "There are 4 lights." We had Khan, a genetically augmented superhuman from the 20th or possibly 21st century, depending on which events you want to believe. And he wakes up in the future and causes some problems. And Lorca, a Terran that jumped into our universe, masqueraded as his doppelganger from this universe, and tried to overthrow the Empire when he got home. The winner of that list was Khan, which is not really greatly surprising there. Group 4, we had Seska, the Cardassian Obsidian Order infiltrator who infiltrated the Maquis disguised as a Bajoran, ended up as a Starfleet crew member, would betray them to the Kazon, and ultimately have a child with Maj Kulla, the leader of the Kazon sect, the Nistrum. She would be successful in capturing Voyager at one point, but ultimately was killed. Next was Marlon Locke, from the more recent series of Star Trek Discovery in the 32nd century. These two villains were the antagonists, a sort of Bonnie and Clyde-esque duo who were on a sort of death race, for lack of a better term, with Starfleet to capture progenitor tech to get themselves out of a bit of hot bother with the Breen. In addition to them, we have Nick Locarno. Nick Locarno was, of course, a Starfleet cadet, a human, that was kicked out of the Academy for reckless behavior, which resulted in the death of another cadet. Later, he would form a coalition of different individuals from a variety of different species, including the Romulans and the Bynars, and would abduct people and ships, making it look like they'd been destroyed, to create his own little faction out in the galaxy. Next, we had Control. Control, of course, is the artificial intelligence computer created by Section 31 in the United Federation of Planets as a sort of strategic analysis computer system that gained sentience and then tried to destroy all life in the galaxy. The winner from this list was Seska. And yeah, notice that Cardassians, they make good villains. Madred, Dukat, Seska, they make good villains. The next list was Dukat. Of course, Gul Dukat, the former prefect of Bajor, he would betray the Alpha Quadrant by getting Cardassia to join the Dominion, starting an interstellar war, and is responsible for the deaths of countless millions of people. Anarax. Debatably, possibly the single most genocidal individual ever. He was responsible for the total extermination of multiple civilizations, in some cases multiple times, recreating and then destroying them again, erasing them from time over and over again. I cannot describe how just horrendous that is when you really think about it. Next we had Ardar Ruafu, who was the Sona, again, one of the leaders of the Sona, attempted to displace, or in his case just destroy, the Baku. He would ally himself with the Dominion and tried to kill Picard, so, not a nice guy. The Duras family. I couldn't really pick a single Duras because every Duras seemed to be a villain. The Duras sisters were arguably the most notable, but there was various different ones, all of whom were different degrees of villainous, and all of which, at one time or another, were an antagonist in the main story. So the Duras family. The winner of this list was Dukat. By quite a long way, actually, the same as Seska, both of them winning that vote by quite a long way. The next group, we had Weyoun. I wasn't going to pick a specific clone, just Weyoun, of course, the Vorta commander of Dominion forces in the Alpha Quadrant during the Dominion War. Again, like Dukat, he was responsible for the deaths of many millions of people and actually advocated for the extermination of all life on Earth, which would have meant he would have been responsible for billions of deaths. Next was Commander Dolan, or General Dolan, of the Xindi. Even when presented with evidence that humanity was not the enemy that he had been led to believe, he still wanted to destroy Earth in order to gain more power for himself and the Xindi reptilians over the other Xindi, a very short-sighted individual. Next, we had Maj Kulla of the Kazon Nistrum, again, the one who allied with Seska and led the charge of the Kazon against Voyager. Without him, for the most part, although the Kazon were not a fan of Voyager, my feeling was the other sects would have pretty much left Voyager alone and just stayed out of its way. But Kulla was a bit obsessed. He was responsible for the deaths of many crew members. He was generally a criminal and a pirate. Even amongst his own people, he was considered a brute and a savage and a particularly violent individual. Next, we had the Borg Queen. Where do you even start? It's also a debate as to whether or not she was technically a person, because she's actually a physical representation of the collective as a whole. And also the Borg don't necessarily always kill, they assimilate. So you don't die, you get a fate worse than death, you become a Borg. The winner of this list was Weyoun. Next we had the seventh group. We had Commodore O, a Romulan infiltrator and member of the Jacques Vache, working from within Starfleet, helped to undermine security and got the Jacques Vache access to the synth that would ultimately result in the destruction of the Utopia Planitia fleet yards, the burning of Mars, the destruction of countless starships, lots of people's deaths, and indirectly, directly, responsible for the near extermination of her own race, because she literally helped destroy the fleet that was going to save the Romulans. It's the biggest own goal in galactic history. I just don't understand that. Vadik. a genetically modified changeling who'd been tortured by Section 31, who would ultimately work with the Borg to try and destroy the Federation. Michael Eddington, a Starfleet officer who would eventually become one of the preeminent leaders of the Maquis rebels, terrorists, whatever you want to call them. You know, one man's revolutionary is another man's terrorist. Eddington would ultimately betray the uniform and his commander and join the Maquis and continue to wage war against the Cardassians. Next, we had John Frederick Paxton, another member of a terrorist organization from humanity, this time Terra Prime. These were xenophobic human isolationists that put humanity first and believed in the supremacy of the human species, as well as they advocated certain genetic purification programs and ethnic cleansing. Basically, they held up individuals like Colonel Green, who were genocidal megalomaniacs who purified the human species in the past to improve its future. And he and his ilk thought these people to be heroes. His objective was to overthrow Starfleet, in a sense, bring it into line, expel all the non-humans and send them home, close the borders, and basically put humanity first. Make sure all the jobs go to humans. Make sure that human goals are seen before the goals of others, and that human lives matter more than those of that they saw as inferior because they were a little different from them, either for religious or simple cultural differences, in that, you know, they're a Vulcan, not a human, and we don't want their kind here anymore because we like to see human faces. The winner from that list was Michael Eddington. The final group had Admiral Diderix, a Romulan military commander, former senator, who would abduct an Enar and was in charge of the program to create the Romulan drones that would attempt to disrupt the nascent United Federation of Planets, starting a chain of events that would ultimately lead to the Earth-Romulan War. Although, again, I could argue he maybe didn't start that conflict, he certainly started stacking the bricks that built up to it. And Osira, a Orion woman from the 32nd century, and generally she was a villain to Starfleet until she was eventually killed and her organization was folded in. The female changeling, another one from the Dominion War, another one responsible directly for the deaths of countless millions. She gave the order to exterminate the Cardassians, which resulted in the deaths of 800 million Cardassians at her order. Ultimately, she would spend probably the rest of her existence in a Federation or Allied prison facility somewhere. And finally, we had Vlos, the leader of the Vulcan High Command, who was actually collaborating with the Romulans for early reunification in the 22nd century, something that would ultimately be stopped, but he was complicit in the bombing of the human embassy on Vulcan and the attempted basically overthrowing of his own government and redirecting his people to a more military footing, trying to start a war with the Andorians. He was basically not the best. The winner of that was the female changeling. So into the semi-finals we had Dukat and Khan ultimately come out of the semi-finals. I don't think there's any need to go through who was in all the lists. We've just gone through all of that, and that brings us down to who exactly should win out of these two of the most greatest villains in Star Trek. I'm not going to lie, I kind of agree with this. I can see why Khan is one of the most recognizable Star Trek villains. Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, is one of the most popular and considered the most accessible of all the Star Trek movies. And of course, Space Seed is heralded as one of the best episodes of the original series. Say what you want about Into Darkness, Benedict Cumberbatch was perhaps not the best casting for Khan. I personally was not happy that J.J. Abrams said that he wasn't going to cast Khan, and then he did. I would have preferred, and I think I've said this in previous videos, if instead of it being Khan, it was simply one of the other augments. There was no need for it to specifically be Khan. All of the augments were genetically engineered superhuman. If you wanted their super blood in order to fix, disease and stuff, they all have the same genetic modifications. They're all the same genetically augmented human race. Khan was, yes, the greatest amongst them, but there's no differences. I would have preferred it was simply one of the others. And of course, Dukat was arguably one of the most fleshed out villains in Star Trek ever. Others that came close, I mean, to be fair, Color was a fairly well fleshed out villain, but as you saw in this vote, he only got 1% of the vote, which did surprise me that he got such a small percentage. A couple of the others got quite low percents as well, mostly from more recent series, and I can understand why. They're often not as fleshed out or as three-dimensional. But Dukat, from season 1 through to season 7 of Deep Space Nine, and technically there's every chance you can always bring this guy back, he's just lost in the fire caves, was one of the single most fleshed out and sympathetic at times villains they ever did. As I said, when they brought him and Kai Wynn together, two of the best villains that Star Trek I think ever made. Again, Louise Fletcher and Mark Alamo did such a good job of basically portraying two sides of the same coin, in my opinion. Where Louise Fletcher again was a villain you loved to hate, and Dukat was a villain you wanted to love. You wanted to like Dukat. You do kind of like him. You maybe sometimes even find yourself rooting for him. Yes, he's a bad guy, but you always wanted to see that redemption for his character. You always thought maybe, just maybe, he'll become a good man. He'll do the right thing. He'll have a noble death or something. And in reality, as time goes on, more of his soul is revealed, and he is the despicable monster that you thought he was. He just wanted to be seen differently. Whereas Kai Wynn, she could barely even conceal it. She was so contemptible. Eesh. But such a good pairing and such a good portrayal. Kudos to both actors. And of course, rest in peace, Louise Fletcher. So, as I said at the beginning of the video, there is a pinned comment in the comment section of this video where you can upvote who you actually want to win. Who is the greatest villain out of this list? And let me know in the comment section down below if there was someone which should have been on this list who wasn't, or someone else you feel should have won, say perhaps Kai Wynn, or Marge Culler, or the Borg Queen, or Eddington, whoever you feel like. Let me know in the comment section down below. If you made it all to the end of this video, I thank you for watching. Bye-bye.